Good morning and good afternoon. This is Mike Dulworth, the CEO of Executive Networks. We're really happy to have you here today with us on this webinar focused on reimagining college and campus recruiting. We've been partnering with Handshake, who's based in San Francisco, to really take a deep dive on this issue over the last 3 or 4 months. We sent out a global survey around this topic to the global 1,000 companies around the world. And then we've been holding a series of ideation sessions, one in Chicago that was hosted by United Airlines, another in New York City, hosted by Mastercard. And we're going to hold a third one, and maybe even more, but the third one will be in San Francisco coming up on February 13th. And these are like half-day sessions where we get 40, 50 talent acquisition professionals, executives together to really dig into this idea of reimagining college and campus recruiting. But as you can see here from the people that we have on the webinar today, we have both Luke from Handshake, who's going to take us through some, really insightful data that Handshake collects through its platform around the students and early kind of career issues and challenges that people are focused on at that part of their career. We have Tim Streeter from Whirlpool, who's been kind of a guiding light for us around this issue, and you'll see he has a real passion for this issue and is really trying to work with us and others to really kind of change fundamentally the thinking about how to approach this type of recruiting within colleges and for early career type people. And then we're really honored too to have Donna, a professor at NYU, who specializes in talent management and human capital, and she's going to tell us some about her perspective, on this issue from the academic viewpoint. So with that introduction, and by the way, just before I turn it over to Luke to start, what we wanted you to do is submit questions. So within go to webinar, there's a place where you can submit a question at any time, and then we'll be answering those questions either throughout the webinar or at the end of the webinar. We certainly are going to leave time for those questions. So with that introduction, let me turn it over to Luke. Take it away.
Thanks, Mike. Very excited to connect with everyone on the call today. As Mike noted, I lead employer product and marketing here at Handshake, and we believe as a network that we've built a foundation for change, a platform for change, to try and evolve the world of college recruiting to be fairer, more democratic, and more effective for employers. And employers are obviously a huge part of that change, so it's exciting to have so many leading companies represented on the call today who will need to be a pivotal part of this change. So I'm going to start by giving a brief overview of Handshake and why we believe we have the scale and the engagement that can shift this market to a more democratic and effective marketplace for talent. So first, I'm going to give an overview of Handshake. We are a college career network that, at our heart, empowers all of our students to find meaningful careers. We work with over 700 university and school partners across the country. We have over 14 million students and alumni in our network, and over 300,000 employers actively recruiting on Handshake. Essentially, every major college recruiting employer in the country now represented on the platform, and we reach over 55% of college students at four-year institutions in the country, and millions of hires and internships are made on our platform each year. So that's the sort of high-level scale of Handshake, and within those 700 plus universities and schools that we partner with, we are the official system of record. And this is important because it allows us to work on the core recruiting activities that happen each fall and spring on campus, which is still where the vast majority of the millions of internship and full-time placements are made. We are officially endorsed, we're trusted by students and by the university, and we power all of the on-campus activities such as events and career fairs. And I'm going to talk in a moment about what we see through that data. We power all of the traditional activity on campus, but also allow employers to do things in a more modern virtual and digital way, reaching across our entire network. And again, I'll talk about what that looks like in 2019 in a moment. So we are the official system of our universities, and as a result, we have the most engaged student audience at scale. Over 70% of our students activate. Last year, we had over 80 million job views. As of the fall recruiting season, we had 80 million job views last year. And students are engaging with the employer outreach on the platform. So there were more than 65% of our messages were viewed by students last year, which goes to show that there is a real appetite and opportunity to build those connections through a platform like ours at scale. So that's some context on Handshake. As a result, we get a unique view of what's going on in the market, and this is where our collaboration with the other organizations and people on this call starts to come in. So we can see, for example, here how students are looking to move when they graduate from college. So in this case, we can look at students in our Northeast schools and where they would like to work. Students tell us their preferred location after graduation. And you can see from students in the Northeast, they predominantly wish to stay. This is not true for all regions. 3/4 of them want to stay in that region. However, there are some folks who are looking to move west predominantly, or to Chicago. And so as an employer, you can start to build an intelligent strategy around students at these schools. For example, if I was an employer in, say, Kansas City, it might be challenging to recruit some of these students. But if I'm an employer in San Francisco, there's actually a fairly good possibility that a student would want to move across the country. And this geographic mobility is a large part of democratizing opportunity, so that students can find the right role for them in a location that works for them that may not be next door to their college or even in the same state. So that's one lens that we can bring that is helping to break down barriers for students. Another lens that we have is the relative popularity of companies. And there's, we could talk for a long time about this slide, but at the highest level, it's very relevant for us to see what employers are resonating in different states across the country. And of course, we can look at not only the top brands, but the top 10 brands. We can look at brands that resonate with different kinds of skill sets, and this can lead to some really interesting competitive insights around how to compete for talent. So, for example, if I was recruiting for students in Oregon, it might surprise me that Tesla is actually the #1 brand that students are interested in. That may not be obvious going in, and it may change how, as an employer, how I need to position my company. Perhaps I need to position my company as being highly innovative, if that's what students are looking for there. And you can see also a tremendous diversity across the country. So lots of opportunity to recruit students who are interested in different things and perhaps have different priorities across the country, including locations we talked about before. So that's the kind of insights we gain from our network. And from a product perspective, in terms of engaging with students and helping them on this career journey, these are some of the high-level peers that are analogous to the Handshake product. And in this call, we're not going to dive into the details of the student experience on Handshake. I'm certainly happy to follow up with anyone on the call who's interested to learn more. But our platform generates engagement through mechanisms similar and features similar to what students have grown up with in this generation. So students are, used to shopping for things on Amazon, so they're used to having a lot of information and a lot of options, and on demand. So we make the job search experience more analogous to, for example, online shopping or Airbnb, where you can see reviews, you can see folks in your network who like a product. We bring that same ethos to our application, and at the same time, we're moving across devices. So Handshake is the most fully featured and widely adopted mobile app for college recruiting, and stating the obvious, that is where students want to do a lot of their activity, particularly around career fairs and events and interacting with content. So we are we're architecting a platform that we believe can move with these shifting behaviors in the modern generation of students. So that's the sort of platform student view of the world. The next question that I believe is relevant to this audience is, how do employers adapt to this? What are we seeing employers do differently in a world where students are connected across hundreds of schools across the country and connected via mobile and so on? Well, the first thing we're seeing is employers are using this network to connect with a dramatically larger audience. So we looked at the data from last fall recruiting season across our employers, and the numbers you're about to see represent the number of schools that employers are connecting with students at. The first number is, this is the number of schools where the average employer on Handshake attended a career fair. So the average employer attended 7 career fairs, which is, when I think of attending 7 career fairs, that does seem like a lot of work. Career fairs only scale so far, and it makes sense that employers are being focused in terms of where they visit physically. In the past, before Handshake, that was essentially the same as the number of schools you recruit at, because you have to be there physically. We then look at the number of schools that employers are posting jobs to and accepting applications from. And this number is dramatically higher, almost over 10x actually in this case. So you're seeing that employers are taking advantage of the fact that they can post virtually to schools and accept applicants across the network to dramatically broaden their reach. And they're doing this to access talent based on the skills, majors, and profiles of students across our school network. So we're seeing a dramatic increase there. And we've also been working with a set of more innovative employers who are really trying to open up their recruiting pipeline and be truly democratic. And amongst those employers, we're seeing some accepting applicants and making hires from as many as 500 plus schools across our national network. So you can see here that there's end-to-end almost 100 times the scale and opportunity to reach the right students who are a great fit for your company. And on the flip side, for those students to reach your company and get a great role, regardless of where they're going to school. So that's the first trend we're seeing, and this trend is well established and well advanced. These are averages across our network. So for employers who are not currently recruiting at dozens of schools, they're essentially now, I would say, behind this trend. The second thing we're seeing is the growth of proactive outreach. So historically, college recruiting was a combination of serendipity and networking. Employers would show up to a career fair or an event on campus. Students would either find them by happenstance because there was a great banner in the gymnasium behind the booth, or potentially through a network, typically through family connections, and they would get a warm introduction to an employer. We're seeing that flip around in 2019, particularly with the growth of technology skills and the continued growth of the knowledge economy. We're seeing employers now reach out to students who have the skills they need, skills like data science, software development, and so on. And between 2017 and 2018, we saw a dramatic growth in the number of employers reaching out to students. In 2017, we saw 12,000 employers reach out to students. In 2018, that number had almost tripled to 29,000. And you can see there the number of employers actively reaching out in the fall season, just dramatic spike there for that fall recruiting season. And this is actually showing the number of unique students who received a message during these times. So last year, millions of students received an outreach from employers, and this will increasingly become an expectation for top talent, for students who excel in the skills that are in demand. They'll expect employers to reach out to them and tell their story. So building on that, employers are finding new ways to tell their story using Handshake and using digital media. So an example that I love to highlight here is IBM. IBM is one of our partners who are focused on diversifying their talent pool and increasing the representation of students from all backgrounds in their hiring class. They embarked on a multi-channel strategy last year on Handshake to engage with students virtually and on campus, sending out campaigns to invite students to attend their events, hosting virtual events, and what you see here is actually a screenshot from an event that they streamed live on Handshake to students across the country. Again, breaking down those barriers, right? Where virtual event streamed across the country now takes out the geographic dimension, takes out the ability of the student to fly an airfare to a conference. Everyone can plug in here, and what we saw for IBM was a dramatic increase, 3x increase in job views, 6x increase in applicants, and 40% of their applicants coming from organizations focused on diversity. So those are some highlights of what we see employers doing. And in summary, Handshake is investing every day here to improve our platform and work with employers to find the best fit between employers and students, both in their core schools and beyond, and thereby democratize opportunity. So with that, we're very excited to be partnering with Mike to understand this change in employer behavior, and I'd like to hand over to him now to take you through some of the results from the survey we conducted last year.
Great. Well, thanks a lot for that, Luke. So I think that instead of kind of going through the slides, one by one, we'll be able to send everybody these slides and the deck. But what I would like to say is, and Luke, you covered a number of the issues that were really identified in this data. So maybe while I'm talking, you can just sort of scroll slowly through the slides. But I think what I'd like to say is that there are really, I think, very traditional approaches, to college and campus recruiting that large global organizations are still utilizing for, by a large extent, and that things haven't changed a whole lot over the last decade or so. But what we have seen is that they are really trying to leverage social media, much more than they did in the past. And, in a sense, try to meet these digital natives, where they live, which makes obviously a lot of sense. But what you're also finding too is that, places where, these organizations might think to go, let's say LinkedIn, are not necessarily the places where these students are living. And so we have to find different avenues for them to engage, with this type of student. And then I would say a couple more things. One is that, the biggest issue for changing the way in which organizations approach their college and campus recruiting is really based on the need for more diversity. And I say diversity with a big D. So, not just gender, ethnicity, but, just in terms of, total diversity, inclusion in the broadest definition, to really try to bring those students into the organization with very different upbringings, very different points of view, very different educations, very different degrees. Bring that diversity to bear on the strategic challenges that the organization faces, especially large global organizations where, it could be that a large proportion of their income or their growth is in, emerging markets or other places where they haven't traditionally been, and they need students who can live and work and thrive in those kinds of environments. And so I think we're seeing, diversity being really the key driver of why there's this bigger, larger, more comprehensive outreach that, a platform like Handshake can bring to people. And then obviously there's many other ways, to go about that. So with that, we will send out this data because I think it's just kind of good for benchmarking. But what I'd really like to do is turn this over to Tim and then ultimately to Anna, because I think they have really interesting, provocative points of view on all of this that are really, kind of the meat of this webinar today. So Tim, over to you.
All right, thanks, Mike. So the section that we'll focus on as the slides catch up here for me, it's called How Data, Science, and Recruiting Can Change the World. And social justice is really the headline. So I will explain what I mean by the data part, the science part, the recruiting part, as well as the social justice part. But if we flip to the next slide, I will give a shameless plug for Whirlpool brands while I give you a bit of context on why I'm focused on this topic. So I've been with Whirlpool just over 2 years in our global head of TA role. Prior to that, I was with Accenture for just over 22 years. And Accenture is one of the largest employers of graduates worldwide. And so I have extensive experience hiring from university across multiple markets and regions. Interestingly, at Whirlpool, you could argue it's probably one of the last places I should be spending my time. So at Whirlpool, we hire around 30,000 people a year. Of those, less than 200 are from university in the US. So why am I focused on this? The reason I am is as I get to hopefully near the end of my career, or at least the end is in sight, and I look back, certainly there's many things I'm proud of in terms of impacts to the companies I've worked for. At the same time, my parents and my brother are all public school teachers. My wife is a social worker, and I don't necessarily think that helping companies that already make a lot of money make more money is a huge legacy to be proud of. So from my point of view, when there's an opportunity to actually affect macro level social change, those are fairly few and far between in the types of roles that I've had. But I think that opportunity exists right now. And so if we flip to the next slide, I'll really explain why I think that's the case and how I think we can bring that to life. And I think it will become clear why I'm leveraging as many of these types of forums as possible to spread the word, so to speak. So university recruitment today, it's been alluded to. I imagine there's a fair number of HR, TA professionals on the phone today. I will say as part of this effort, I've probably talked to 50 or more leads. Some are global leads, some are North America or US leads, some are campus leads in the US. But 50 or so people leading some form of university recruitment in the US. And without exception, they're all doing some form of a fixed number of visiting schools. Some of them, may have some non-visiting schools where they conduct some virtual events, but it's still a fixed number of schools that they're focused on. And if you wonder why that is, why is everything else evolved in terms of our consumer experience, but as it relates to recruitment, why are we stuck in the same model we've had the last 20 years? I would point to the success measures that are listed on the right. So every company will have different flavors of these, but essentially delivery is, if we need to hire 100 people, did you hire 100 people? Quality I'll come back to, but value, typically there's a budget and every year the budget is 3 to 5% less than last year's budget, but you still need to deliver your 100 people. From a candidate experience and diversity perspective, I'd argue these are completely lost in this model that most of us are still stuck in. So from a candidate experience perspective, the idea of seeing a advertisement on campus or even a digital advertisement, going to an event, listening to some slides, and then handing somebody a piece of paper or filling out a form on an iPad at the end doesn't feel very targeted or personalized. And from a diversity perspective, if you're only going to 20 or 30 schools, whether they're visiting or non-visiting, you've limited yourself to the diversity mix of those 20 or 30 schools by definition. And so the quality piece, I would say, people can typically convince themselves the quality is good enough. If you put 10 people in a room, you'll typically get 10 different definitions of what quality is. But the most common will have to do with retention, time to promotion, or performance ratings. Some people try to get fancy and do an algorithm with weighted, variables of all three. But however you do it, you can typically convince yourself, surprised, that if you keep going to the same 20 schools you've been going to for the last 20 years, you'll get more people that look like the people that are in the organization today. And so that's why I put that one yellow. But if we move forward, so I think it's an interesting moment because the thing that could actually help employers turn all of those success measures green is actually in the best interest of the students and actually provides more and better opportunities for students everywhere, not just at the quote unquote top tier schools. And if you play it out, which we will over the next few slides, if we do what's in best interest for the employers and we do what's best interest for the students, it actually has the potential to have a significant macro level impact on social justice. So we can jump to the next one. So I said data science and recruiting can change the world. What do I mean by the data piece? The data piece is really referring to a searchable database of all students. And while that doesn't exist, certainly globally, but even in the US, Handshake is closest to it, and certainly on the trajectory to continue to be closest to it. There are others. So I had reached out to these organizations really to understand not just where their product is, but where they want to take it. So I contacted the CEO for Piazza, for Handshake, a relationship with the president at Indeed, and some contacts at LinkedIn as well. And in talking to the people in each of the organizations, I think LinkedIn and Indeed clearly would like to have all of the students or early career professionals. They've tried a couple different ways to do it. They haven't succeeded yet. So I think they're more in lay back and hope to acquire in the future mode. And Piazza is a tool that has been marketed as something that will help employers, but frankly, it's a tool that's created in the first place for social collaboration among professors and students. So it's proliferated because it's good at that. But as they've tried to pivot and market it as a tool for employers, there's really very little interest in taking employer input to shape that product. And so in talking with the team at Handshake, it's the place where I invested my time and felt there was the biggest opportunity, not only in terms of their scope and impact so far, but certainly in terms of the trajectory, the pace of growth, and probably most importantly, fundamentally, if you go to the homepage of their site, the first things that it talks about is democratizing opportunity for all students. So it doesn't matter who your parents are, where they went to school, or how much money they have. They want you to have the same opportunities as everybody else. So that resonated with me and the focus of this effort. So that's where I focused my energy on the data side. If we move forward, looking at what the tool has to offer in the context of the talent acquisition success measures, it's pretty interesting because it completely transforms candidate experience and diversity. So to give you an example, I can go in the tool and I can do a search that says, show me people from any school in the Midwest or nationwide. I don't care which school. I want them to be mechanical engineering majors who are graduating not this year, but next year. And specifically, I'm looking for African-American females. So I can find that group. I can individually engage that group and say, hey, we found you through this tool. We'd love to introduce you to Whirlpool. We're having a virtual event with some of our African-American female engineering leaders. We'd love to have them share with you why they were attracted to Whirlpool in the first place and why they stay here and what makes them happy. So that completely transforms from a student point of view or a candidate point of view. I mean, that is individual engagement, identification and engagement. And from a diversity perspective, obviously enables us to be very targeted with different groups where we need or want to. However, on the other pieces, I will point out from an employer perspective, it does create some issues. So it's an amazing tool and you can do all these things, but all of these things require people to create the event, run the events, market the events. And as I mentioned before, usually year over year, most of the recruitment teams are dealing with the same or fewer number of recruiters and the same or slightly less budget. And so as you start to experiment in this area, it's great to run some events, but quickly some of the teams can get overwhelmed. And I think what we found is in some cases, people have to choose between, do I do it the new way or the old way? And if they know the old way is going to get them their numbers, I'm going to hit the 100 people you asked me to deliver, and I'm going to do it the budget that you gave me, and I'll be able to justify the quality or rationalize the quality, then they revert to what they know. And so if we really want this to turn the corner and take off, I think we need to add the science piece. So if we move forward, The science piece is really adding some other variables, and I'd make an analogy here. You can go ahead and move the slide forward. I'd make an analogy here to Match.com, which is, I haven't used it myself, only because I've been married for a long time, but certainly multiple dimensions of compatibility, I think is the term that they would use, is going to produce better results than if we're only matching on, where do you live and what food do you like. If we're matching on 100 different variables about interests and hobbies and background, we're much more likely to match up with people that we want to be matched up with. And so in that spirit, behavioral assessment, along with technical assessment and preferences as well, the slide that Luke shared earlier that shows where people from the Northeast want to work and live. For a company like Whirlpool that's based in Benton Harbor, Michigan, that's good information. We could spend a lot of time finding a lot of people who look like good fits, but if they're not interested in working in our part of the country, it's going to be a tougher sell, and we're going to have a lower conversion rate than if we focus on areas where we know they're looking to work in our area. So if you combine these things, from a behavioral assessment perspective, if you think about what you're doing with a behavioral assessment, essentially you're indexing your current population of high performers. You're looking at the collective behavioral characteristics of what makes them successful in that role at your company. And you're flipping that and you're saying, we want to find people that are likely to be successful and happy in this role in our company. And so what's interesting here is the question is, what if the career planning and placement professionals at universities were advising students that the best way for you to be discovered by Fortune 500 employers is to take the behavioral assessments and technical assessments that they're using. So rather than hoping you get invited into the company-specific process, go ahead and take these assessments and store that information in a Handshake tool. And what that enables, if we flip to the next slide, what that enables from an employer perspective is now I can match on multiple dimensions. So if you think about the first example I gave, that might return a list of 50 people, and I have a great engaging virtual event, but ultimately I have to figure out who's interested. That takes a lot of time, a lot of discussions, a lot of effort, and then ultimately I invite people into my employer-specific process, and I filter through them, and out of that 50, maybe I get one hire. With this type of approach, that 50 instantly could become a list of 3 to 5 people. So it's 50 that meet my filtering criteria. But when I say, and also show me people that are behavioral matches 90% or greater to my existing high-performing engineering professionals at my company, that list could go to 3 or 5. And you're going to engage that group in a completely different way. So that's very high touch, it's very personalized, and it's much more of the tone or spirit that we know you would be successful at our company, or it's extremely likely you will be successful at our company. What's the best way for us to connect with you and give them options? So that's not something you can do at scale, but if you have an efficient process that gives you a smaller volume of higher qualified matches, and you're able to do that across every school in the US, as opposed to just the ones that are on your visiting list, then everything on the right starts to turn green. And if you're a talent acquisition professional, then your VP of talent or your CHRO is very happy with the results you're driving, and you're helping the company be more successful. So if we move forward, that's really the recruiting part, which is to say, great, it's amazing that we have tools, or tools are evolving in such a way that we could use them like this. But if recruiters don't actually change the way we recruit, if we just keep going to the same list, fixed number of schools that we've been going to for several years, then nothing's going to change. But the good news is we're the ones that decide how we do it. So yes, there's always negotiation with your HR and business leadership, but at the same time, you're being asked to deliver an outcome, which we saw on the right on the previous screen. And you're being asked to deliver that outcome in the most efficient and profitable way for your company. And that's what we're suggesting, is that this is actually best for the employers in terms of driving those outcomes, but it's actually best for students as well, because regardless of what school you're going to, for that matter, maybe you're not going to a university yet, If you're able to take these types of assessments and have them stored in a tool that employers are using to find matches, you can be discovered in ways that you could not be discovered previously. So what we've been doing, just to share and close quickly on this slide, we reached out to other companies that were interested to pilot this. And so we partnered with Handshake, we partnered with Pymetrics, and we partnered with CodeSignal for assessment and technical assessment, behavioral and technical assessment providers. And the companies you see here, along with others, actually tried doing it this way in the fall cycle. I'll tell you, it didn't work perfect to hypothesis. So what we found, it was awesome in getting a small group of highly qualified people. What we found is we haven't been able to convert them in the same or even close to the same pass-through rates that we see at the schools that we've gone to historically. So in one sense, that's not surprising, but in another sense, you know, we knew it might be less, but we didn't know how much less. So there's certainly some iterative learning that needs to take place to evolve the approach and ultimately drive the results. But I think the exciting thing is that there's a large group of well-known employers, you know, that are interested to make that transition. So if we go to the next slide, you know, this is the change the world part. So if you play this out, if employers are able to individually identify and engage students, then it becomes less important what universities those students are attending. And if from a student perspective, you have access to the same top jobs from the same top employers, regardless of what school you're going to, the school becomes less important. And if that's the case, if you're at a university in any capacity, it forces the question, what is our value proposition? Because it's not X% of our students, you know, are hired at Fortune 500 companies, you know, within a month after graduating. If that's happening broadly, because the technology and the process changes are enabling it, then it forces you to reevaluate what is that value proposition. I think it forces reevaluation of pricing as well as potentially even what are the experiences that we want to give students at university. Is it really about building deep capability in a degree? Or are there other experiences that are valued by employers or valued for life, for that matter, that you know, that make more sense to focus on? So that's the change the world part, and the part that gets me excited is to think that if we can get a majority of Fortune 500 employers to make this type of shift, we have the opportunity to have that type of impact and change, not only in the US, but around the world as well. So we'll leave it there. I think I'm a couple minutes over my time, but I'll leave it there and hand it off to Donna.
Yeah, and just to kind of reintroduce Donna, I think the really interesting thing about Donna is she's both a former chief talent officer for Nokia and AIG and a number of different industries, number of different global companies. She's also what I call a pracademic. So while she is a professor at NYU, she is interested in the practical application of ideas and theories and research to business, and is really at the forefront of that intersection, you know, between business and organizations and academics and research. So really fascinating person. And if you've been following her, like with her articles in the Harvard Business Review, you'll know that that's where she's coming from. So Anna, turning it over to you.
Thanks so much. I will just make a few comments from the educational perspective, where we stand in the professional education field and how we approach the market. We've heard from Handshake, who's trying to, you know, create that universal access to opportunities. And Tim, thank you very much for very inspiring and purposeful, you know, a model that you are developing from the employer perspective. But what I kept hearing was about the students coming out of the universities sort of a prepackaged. And I want to unbundle it and say that from the educational perspective where we stand in the universities, we are also looking out to the employers and to the market to broaden our options. And most importantly, and that's what's happening in the agile schools, And there are obviously universities, and every university is trying to create the brand that is relevant in their own way to the market that they're facing. And obviously, being a professor at NYU, we have a market right around us that we can gauge against and compare ourselves to and get feedback from that allows us to create a much more diverse and much better prepared student population for the employers in all parts of the country, and most importantly, even the world. And that's something that I think we need to be very clear also to the employers. And I understand, Tim, that broadening the geography of your schools and the brands of the schools you are going to is really important. But you also looking on the inside of the university, you have to see that we are diversifying very proactively and purposefully the student population who we are bringing in. Obviously, there are criteria and mostly academic criteria by which we hire, but we also, in terms of socioeconomic backgrounds of people coming to us, you will encounter the same diversity as you may in different schools. So I wouldn't look at the universities as a static, as a static partner in this very dynamic field of college recruitment. So one thing, if I were to talk to the employers, I would say to pay attention to, again, this diversification that is occurring in the schools from the student body perspective. Secondly, I would say employers need to start building relationships with the academic community and professors and going to the classrooms, helping us shape the curriculum, being very clear about what the expectations are for the students coming out of schools. And also, very importantly, and that's something that, we are partnering with Executive Networks on, doing this research on what's important for the marketplace, the skill sets, the attitudes, the behaviors, because when you're measuring at the output of the academic career, of the academic journey for students, is actually malleable, is actually being shaped in the 4 to 3 to 2 years, depending on the program that students are taking in the universities. And you can come in and help us do the work and direct the right kind of educational process so that on the output, you're going to get a lot more people meeting those criteria that you're measuring for when it comes to actually recruiting people into your companies and your organizations. So the message that I want to convey from the university perspective is don't look at the universities as a static, just machine producing after a certain number of classes, sort of manufacturing a certain type of person based on the university brand. I would encourage the employers to build relationships with the educational partners that go much deeper into the kinds of curricula that the universities are producing and teaching, build relationships with the professors, because of the a lot of our classes are now delivered also virtually, and the virtual connection is available to any class, even if it's meeting in person. Participate in the classroom, build relationships, influence the programs, help shape those skills and behaviors that are relevant to the market, and you're going to get a much better output and much better return on the initial investment at the end of it, because at the recruitment process, because you're going to get a better quality, better fit, and a much more diverse pool of talent that you can draw on than if you came in, which often is the case, to this career fair, assuming that, the universities are just producing what you want. And this is actually the feedback we're getting from our partners, university partners, who are telling us that the biggest challenge right now is not even that psychological fit and not even a particular degree that people are graduating with, but the actual fit in the workplace. The employers find themselves having to retrain people who are coming into having been recruited through this sophisticated science-based process, but there's still not the relevant skill set that they're looking for, in addition to all the social and aspects, diversity aspects of the student body that you're looking at. So, coming to this conversation from the university perspective, I have a lot of lessons to learn and some messages to convey. And my message is, please do not look at the recruitment as a transaction that happens at the end of the university study. At this point and in this challenging market, the companies that are going to succeed are going to be the ones who establish relationships with the universities. Yes, looking at the global network and using the right platforms to search for diverse talent, but at the same time, really helping universities understand what is expected, what is needed in the workplace, and work with the universities, both doing some research, providing data, and helping shape that next generation talent that's going to be coming to your organizations and changing the workplace. So it is a very synergetic relationship. It goes a lot deeper than just a transaction at the end of the study, and it does have a deep relational nature. The better relationships, and you showed actually, Handshake showed a map of these preferred brands in different regions of the country. I think that that is something to pay attention to and think about how you can create that ecosystem around your organization that will include educational partners who will help in the long run with a continuous pool of a reliable talent. And don't forget that alumni of the university bring other students that are in the pipeline finishing their education, and that relational connection is really, really important. So to sum this all up, I think I'm very happy to see that what we are talking about, this the future of college recruitment, is becoming a much more collaborative, much more intertwined process where we work as partners with the platform and organization like Handshake that will provide data analytics and the opportunity to connect through the program and enormous scale to employers like Whirlpool, who are forward-looking, the explorers in that space with a social mission in mind, and the universities who are here for for the students, for the multiple generations of students going through our programs, are ready to step to the next to their careers, but ready, prepared, diverse, and helping in to meet that goal of diversified, socially relevant, purposeful workplace where we're getting to. So just as final comments, Mike, at the end from the university perspective, I hope it connected well and made sense.
Thank you. That was, I think, a wonderful capstone to the conversation, bringing in the university perspective and some real depth there about, for me, the big message there that it's not just about recruiting, that's critical, but it goes deeper to the match between skills of graduates and needs of employers, which is certainly something we think about. So thank you very much for that deep exploration. And with that, we'd like to get to Q&A. This is Luke here from Handshake, and we'll be running through some of the great questions we got here. And I think we have 5 or so minutes to run through those. And they're mostly for myself and Tim. There's also one for Anna that I think is a really nice one to finish on as well. So without further ado, first question that I'll address here from Subraya: do employers hire from community colleges? Yes, the employers we work with hire across all kinds of institutions. Handshake currently does not work with any community colleges, but that is in our forward-looking plan. And a related question from Rachel about students who attend universities not yet on the Handshake platform. Today, students who are at schools not on the Handshake platform are not connected to the network, but we do see, we see a lot of students signing up for Handshake at those schools, particularly through our mobile app, and we do plan to support those students this year. So stay posted for more developments there, but we definitely want to move beyond our network of official partners and help all students across the country. So stay posted on that point. Then I have a great question here. The question is, we've been looking at alternatives for a more digital approach. In some cases, we are stuck due to the university processes. Any thoughts on gaps between advancing the process and adapting the approach when universities have standard ways of working? And I think, again, it was great to close on Anna's discussion, because we see a lot of enthusiasm from universities to adapt and evolve. And as Handshake, we can provide them with the data and the tools to evolve, particularly in career services, but also upstream in terms of the tracks and academics. So I would say, in the case where we are working with both an employer and a school, we can often encourage the school to try and adapt to new things. For example, this year we encouraged a lot of schools to allow their students to join virtual events via Handshake, even though that event was not specific to their school, was broadcast across 50 or 100 schools. Schools are opening up to the idea that more connections for their students is better, more information for their students is better. And so I could tell a number of stories, but I would say the universities we work with are more progressive in this regard. And in some cases, employers will raise questions or issues with us that we can then actually work with the university on to broker or help advance. We have a community of universities that we work with on an ongoing basis who collectively are innovators. So great question. Next question regarding the student population and the assessments that Tim talked about. How many students are on Handshake? A total number of alumni and recent grads alumni and current students is 14 million. We have around 9 million current students, and we currently on the platform, there are something like around 4 million active students. So for most of our employers, if they embark on a digital strategy, they can reach a critical mass of students with the skills and attributes they're looking for within those millions. We found that once you get into the high millions, it becomes really a trade-off between the specific criteria you have and the number of students. But there's a critical mass of audience there. Then there's a question of how many students have taken the assessments that Tim referred to, the biometrics and behavioral assessment. And the number is in the low thousands. This was a pilot last year, so we were somewhat targeted with our outreach, and students had to be motivated and proactive. So we have several thousand that we matched with, as Tim said, a dozen or so employers. And so it was really a pilot scale. If you're interested in exploring that with us, both Tim and I are happy and willing to discuss that pilot in our future plans. But at the moment, it's a relatively small percentage of our students that have taken the assessments. We did hear very good, strong feedback from students that they found it interesting, useful. They learned about themselves and about about the opportunities that could fit in. So early signs are encouraging there. Now I have a question that I will throw over to Tim. The question is, as you move to this new approach of recruiting, how has your team structure changed?
So like most teams, we don't have a magic tree with money or people that gives us more to do it. So we have to be wise about how we transition. And so in the case of Whirlpool, we set specific targets on how are we going to transition. And so the only way that we can create time to focus on using the new tool is by grabbing it from reducing time that was invested in the old processes. So if we had, in our case, gone to 10 schools and conducted, X number of events per school the previous year, then year over year, we reduced the number of events and the number of schools and took that time to focus it and invest it on sourcing from the tool itself. So it's a bit of a trade-off, but shifting over time and setting clear targets on what we're trying to accomplish the first year of doing it.
Great, makes a lot of sense. And on the topic of change and evolution, I'm going to bundle a couple of questions together for Anna here, a couple of related questions. And to bundle them together, the question is, how can employers influence programs within a university or influence a university to produce graduates that have a better fit of skills for employers? I'm sure that's more than a 2-minute answer, but I'll let Anna try and provide a sort of high-level soundbite there.
Yes. Obviously, it takes two to build a relationship. So, and I would say go into the classrooms, meet the professors, start with the people who are teaching in those classrooms and creating curricula. And your entry point could be the career center at the university, because they have the relationships to different departments and different schools and in a bigger university. I think getting to know where your ideal candidate would come from, what kinds of programs they would graduate from, and trying to have a conversation with that particular program. And it could be something you can give easily. Go and do a guest lecture in a class. You don't have to wait for the career fair. Usually it's a great development tool for senior and mid-level executives. They all like to talk to the students, create these informal opportunities, and build relationships with professors. Every professor would want to engage in some sort of, I would suspect, in some sort of research opportunity with you, because making connection directly to the business is important, especially in the programs that are focused on the business. So I think going through the career center with whom you're usually interacting and asking for introductions to the department chairs and professors, individual professors, is the best way to actually begin to understand what the internal needs are. And then you find yourself really helping significantly to shape that curriculum, because from what I'm hearing from employers and the partners that we at NYU have relationships with, the employers, is the relevance of the skill set and the need to retrain people when they educate. So after they come, when you recruit them, and after they get to the job. So our goal at NYU, for example, and I'm sure a lot of other schools are targeting the same, is to already produce candidates that are going to be fit for the jobs that are in front of them, and obviously desirable for the best employers in the country. So the universities are much more open than you think. And it's a matter of making the time to build a relationship.
Yeah. Thanks, Anna. That was a great summary, and that takes us to time. There are a couple other questions here that I will try and answer directly if folks can stay on the webcast. But we we are at time, so we're going to wrap up. Thanks so much for joining. Thanks to all the other presenters for really exploring a super important topic, and one that there's, you can see incredible alignment across employers, universities, and Handshake on this topic. And as Mike noted, he'll be sending out some of these data for you to review at your leisure as well. So thanks all for joining. Have a great day, and this is Luke from Handshake signing off.